Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to my regular updates from our capital. Obviously, a lot going on the Hill and around the country. But I want to start with thinking back a year ago, and I'm wearing the pin today for Flight 5342 that crashed, killing 67 individuals into the Potomac. I still remember a year ago when literally driving by National about 10 minutes after the crash took place, and I'd never seen as many red lights, blue lights, yellow lights, all descending on an airport. One of the challenges we live in the DMV is we've got a lot of different jurisdictions, but that night I saw first responders from Maryland, the district, Virginia, from all communities, federal and state, all come together. I was at the airport the next morning as they were still recovering bodies, and obviously we still send our condolences to the lives who were dramatically changed and the victims' families. And I know it is particularly challenging since many of the victims were potential Olympians, many of them skaters, and they would have been heading off to Milan these days if we hadn't had that tragedy. And as we saw from the National Transportation Safety Board report, this accident could have been prevented. And I think we all need to commit ourselves to making sure it never happens again. Now, many of us, Senator Kaine and I and the Maryland senators, have said for a long time you can't keep cramming more flights into D.C. I mean, our region's airports ought to be governed by safety protocols, not by the whims of Congress. While this particular accident they didn't find anything related to the slots, as you've got the nation's single biggest, busiest runway at National. But there are things that we can correct. We in the Senate have passed already the Rotor Act, a bipartisan piece of legislation that would mandate that a military aircraft, in this case a military helicopter, because this airspace is so crowded around National, would have to have the ADS-B signaling mechanism on. The American flight had that on. The military helicopter a year ago didn't have that on, so they could have communicated better. We've got to do a better job of having more air traffic controllers and more FAA safety personnel. All these would be included in the Rotor Act, and it's long overdue that the House hasn't passed this and got it to the president's desk. I've also got other legislation in place to try to, again, beef up FAA safety protocols. But one of the things that continues to concern me is that even if we pass the Rotor Act, are we going to be able to recruit the kind of quality folks we need at the FAA on safety and the enormously stressful positions that are air traffic controllers? These are federal employees, and when we've got an administration that seems to be on a war against federal employees, you can go back to the OMB director Volker's claim that he wants to terrorize the federal workforce. Well, the federal workforce has been terrorized over the last year. We've seen a lot of loss of good talent, and how do you encourage a young person to go join the federal service, even if the mission is important, when you've got this constant threat, at least from this administration? We got to do better. We've got to respect our federal workforce, which leads right into the next topic around what's happening in Minneapolis. I think the American public has seen the images of the killings in Minnesota. They know that ICE is an agency that now has run amok, that it needs guardrails. And before we fully pass the final funding bills to keep the government open, we've got to have some of those guarantees in place that this will be dealt with. I know I just finished voting on the first round. This was the test vote, which again will go down. And there are conversations going on between the White House and the Democratic leadership about splitting off and allowing the other 5 bills to go through, as well as then taking the necessary days or a week or so to kind of work out the reforms for ICE. I'm anxious to get an update on those conversations when I leave this studio over the next hour or so. But we've got to put reforms in place. And again, I think it is evidence that the American people, in many ways, who've been caught in their homes, not just here in the region, but across the whole country with the major snowstorm, their eyes don't lie. They all have seen the video. So no matter how much the administration had to mischaracterize, for example, Mr. Preti, who was an ICU nurse, as they tried to characterize him as some kind of bad guy, wannabe terrorist, all false, all lies. When people saw the video, they believed their eyes, not the lies that come out from DHS Secretary Kristi Noem, who, by the way, should be, in any normal administration, would have been fired by now. They saw with their own eyes, and I think, again, finally, the White House and some of my Republican friends are saying, hey, we've got to put some guardrails in place, and my hope is that we can continue to work through the afternoon and tomorrow, over the weekend as necessary to get that in place. And then finally, if this wasn't enough, we saw evidence last night that the FBI and the Justice Department was launching an effort to collect voting data from Fulton County, Georgia. Now, the idea that this Justice Department, which says it doesn't have time to finish getting the Epstein files released, but suddenly finds time to pursue a politically motivated complaint because of the president's obsession about his loss of Georgia in 2020 and his loss of the election in 2020, is really a misallocation of resources. And if there's any question about that this doesn't pass the smell test, you may have also seen that the FBI agent in charge in Atlanta has been either fired or removed. We don't know yet, but it probably is evidence that he didn't want to go along with this politically motivated event. And as we follow who signed the warrant or who asked for the warrant, it appears they couldn't find somebody in Georgia that would normally be the case where a warrant was generated for this kind of search. Instead, it was signed by a U.S. attorney in Missouri, again, evidence of the political nature. So that search in itself is very suspect. But what really set my hair on fire was who appears at this FBI raid? The Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard. Tulsi Gabbard has no domestic election security responsibilities. She has responsibilities if there is evidence of foreign malign influence. By the way, she has personally dismantled the Foreign Malign Influence Center that was set up under Trump 1. So why was she showing up here? If there is a foreign intelligence connection to this 2020 election case, one, we should have heard about it, and two, if she's got that evidence, it is her duty to report it to the Intelligence Committee, which she has not. So the only other reason she may be there is that it has been reported that she has outed the president's favor. She's not been included in senior intelligence meetings. She's not been briefing the Gang of Eight. She may be in Donald Trump's doghouse, and she may be trying to kind of curry favor with the president. Well, hello, everybody. I hope you can hear me now, and I apologize. There was a technical screw-up here in the studio. I know I went already 8 minutes. I'll try to shorten my opening so we can get to the question, but I think it's really important that I hit these three topics at the top. I'm wearing a pin today because it was a year ago that we had the crash of the flight from Wichita that cost 67 lives. I still remember, I was literally going by Reagan that night and saw all the first responders come from all the jurisdictions to try to provide relief. Unfortunately, all 67 lives were lost. We still think about the victims and their families, particularly a hard time now because, as we remember, many of those victims were world-class skaters that were going to, but for this, might have been on the Olympic team going to Italy right now. So we've got to make sure this kind of accident doesn't happen again. National Transportation Safety Board came out with their report saying this accident could have been prevented. So we've got to make sure that we take those actions. One, we've got to pass the Rotor Act, which has already passed the Senate. I was a proud co-sponsor of it, which would require the kind of ADS-B communications that would take place between the plane and any military aircraft. It was amazing to me that the military aircraft didn't have that signaling tool in use the night of the crash. We've got to do a better job about the very crowded airspace where we've got military, president's aircraft, others flying around this region on the nation's single busiest runway, something that Tim Kaine and I have complained about time and again, where Congress continues to jam in more slots into national when we see that this airport can't handle that much more traffic. I've got other legislation that would increase, again, FAA safety standards. But one of the challenges we've got, we need more FAA safety folks. We need more air traffic controllers. But it's hard to recruit those individuals when you've got an administration like this one that has said publicly that it wants to terrorize the federal workforce. We've seen the number of federal workers who've left federal service over the last year, record highs. When you lose quality people, it's not only that loss, but can you replace them if you're going to continue to have this threat coming from this administration? So we think of the victims. We've got to pass the legislation, but we've got to make sure, again, that we not only use the technical means, such as the ADS-B system, but that we also treat our workforce with the kind of respect they deserve. Second topic, which is obviously top of mind, I just came from a vote on this issue, which is the American people have seen the tragedies unfold in Minneapolis. In many ways, even though the Trump administration tried to lie and misrepresent the most recent victim, Mr. Preti, and somehow call him a wannabe terrorist, this was a guy that was an ICU nurse at the VA who was treated with enormous respect by his colleagues and co-workers. Even though Kristi Noem tried to mischaracterize and lie about this victim, and by the way, Kristi Noem in any normal administration would be fired by this time, she put out those lies. In many ways, the fact that the American people have been caught in their homes, not just here in the DMV, but across the country with the snowstorm, they got to see the video with their own eyes. So their eyes didn't lie. We are now trying to work with the White House. We went through a test vote right now that failed, but says, hey, we need to keep the government open, but you've got to put meaningful reforms in place around ICE. The American people want it. I think even many of my Republican colleagues want it. There are common sense things around law enforcement. We ought to not having these roving patrols. We ought to make sure that these agents are clearly identified and, if possible, not be masked, have body cameras on, have appropriate warrants. Basically take ICE back to the old protocols and procedures where this kind of activity, where ICE agents are put into crowd control and a series of other activities they're just not trained for. So that is playing out real time. And then finally, while most of the country's attention has been rightfully focused on the situation in Minneapolis, I want to point out something that I think is now capturing people's attention. Why last night did the Justice Department issue a warrant to collect voter information from Fulton County, Georgia? This seems to be the president's personal political obsession. He can't acknowledge the fact that he lost Georgia, that he lost the election in 2020. And the idea that he is forcing the Justice, or having the Justice Department take this out, a Justice Department that, by the way, can't follow the existing law to get out all the Epstein files in a timely basis, because he says they've got too much work to take on this politically motivated effort is beyond me. And if there's any doubt about the political motivation, you've seen that and we're trying to get all the background of this, that the head of the field office, the head FBI agent in Atlanta, has quit or been fired. The fact that this warrant was not signed by the U.S. attorney in Georgia, but signed by a U.S. attorney in the state of Missouri, a total Trump loyalist that had frankly, no oversight over this whatever investigation that might be. So we've got to get to the bottom of this. But what we've also got to get to that set my hair on fire was, guess who else showed up at this FBI raid? The Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard. Tulsi Gabbard's role is to deal with foreign spying, to deal with foreign malign influence, to be focused on keeping our country safe from foreign adversaries. Unless she's claiming that there is a foreign influence somehow involved in this investigation, and if there is, she has to notify the intelligence communities that she has not, so she's violated her duty there, or the only other reason she's showing up is to try to find some way to get back in Donald Trump's good graces. Clearly, it is evident because she's not been briefing the Gang of Eight. She's not been involved in reporting in many of the senior meetings about our intelligence and military activities around the world. If she is so desperate for her boss's affection that she's showing up inappropriately at a politically motivated FBI raid, I've already called for Ms. Gabbard to be replaced. This is, again, further evidence of inappropriate behavior. And again, I'll be anxious to get an explanation, but boy, on face value, this doesn't pass any kind of smell test at all. So I've got additional comments, but I know we've waited already with the 8 minutes of the messed up not being able to hear me. So why don't I go to Catherine and I'll start taking your questions.
Hi, Senator. It's Mitchell Miller from
Mitchell.
COP. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. You're coming in fine without the feedback. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. Related to Homeland Security and the partial government shutdown threat, as you know, there's discussion of possibly passing a short-term continuing resolution. What approach would you like to see to get to new Homeland Security legislation? And I know you touched on what you would like to see included. And are you encouraged by the fact that the White House is moving on this now?
Yeah, I'm encouraged. But I don't trust the White House. I mean, the idea that they were going to take this by executive action, we've found time and again that they have broken their word. I don't trust the process of creating a separate bill. If there's reforms, I think they need to be in the DHS funding bill. And, it is good news that the White House is talking with the Democratic leadership. I expect to get briefed in the next hour on our next step forward, and I'm hopeful we can get to a successful resolution.
Our next question is from Charles with WRVA.
Good afternoon, Senator. This is Charles Pyle from WRVA
Hey, Charles.
in Richmond. How are you, sir?
Good, thank you.
Thank you for taking my question. Last night, as I'm sure you're aware, last night, as I'm sure you're aware, the Hanover County Board of Supervisors adopted a statement stating its opposition to a planned ICE facility in the county. Their statement included reaching out to Virginia's 2 senators to enlist their aid in stopping the project. I was just curious about your thoughts on that and whether you have been contacted by Hanover County.
Well, I was actually in Hanover County about 10 days ago where I did a roundtable and town hall with business leadership. I met the chairman of the board, and I tried to call him last night. I didn't know they were reaching out. I think this is, Hanover County is known as a very conservative community. But I think the citizens have risen up and say they don't want this kind of facility in Hanover County. These detention centers, I visited the center in Farmville, which was a former private prison. I visited the holding facility up in Chantilly. If this is the will of the community, I want to try to work with them. And again, I think this is the kind of evidence that we got to put reforms around ICE. If Hanover County is coming, I think, at a 6-1 vote, I believe the vote was, to say, hey, we don't want this with the current ICE practices, protocols, procedures coming into our county, that ought to be a message to all of my friends, and particularly the Republican members in the Virginia delegation, that they ought to join us in putting some guardrails on ICE. So I look forward to working with the county in a way that can be productive.
Our next question is from Tom with Fox 5.
Hi, Senator. Thanks for doing the call. Just a quick one here. NTSB issued a series of recommendations Tuesday. How do you ensure that the Department of Transportation and FAA puts those recommendations into action?
Well, first, we can pass the Rotor Act, which would, for example, one of the main causes of this crash was the fact that the military helicopter, the Black Hawk, didn't have its ADS-B system on. They had it, but they didn't have it on. So many of the NTSB recommendations are in the Rotor Act, which has already passed the Senate unanimously, and I do not have the slightest idea why it's not passed the House. It's outrageous and irresponsible. Second, we've got to make sure that we continue to staff up the FAA and the air traffic controllers. And there's been word from the administration they're going to try to do it, but I believe it's going to be hard when you continue to see this kind of, again, not my words, but the OMB director, that they want to traumatize and terrorize the federal workforce. So we need an administration that's going to actually work with the people who keep our airspace safe. And the third, if there are additional recommendations that aren't included in the Rotor Act, I've got some. I haven't gone through all of those yet. It was just yesterday it came out, but I've got additional FAA legislation, and then it's going to be our job as oversight to make sure that the Department of Transportation implements these. And ultimately, we're seeing in ICE an agency that kind of run amok, and we're putting guardrails in place, and the ultimate ability for Congress to do that is by withholding funding. The same would be true for the Department of Transportation, although I've got to believe, and on this case, there's obviously, other than the whole attitude towards federal workers, I think the administration has tried to work forward-leaning on trying to make sure that this kind of incident doesn't ever happen again. I would add one other item. I sure as heck hope. We've kind of put the bed for the next couple of years the debate about adding new flights to National Airport to accommodate, the personal whims of members of Congress. I sure as heck hope that when the FAA bill comes up again, that we don't try to see any more flights jammed into National. Those of us who, this is our local airport, I fly in and out on a regular basis. Most members of Congress do. You'd think they'd be more focused on this. The runway at National is already the busiest in the country. We shouldn't put any more burden on it.
Our next question is from Jory with Federal News Network.
Hi, Senator. Thanks for doing today's call. I wanted to hear from you what you're hearing from your Republican colleagues as far as the plan going forward to possibly go forward with a DHS continuing resolution and move forward with the other 5 spending bills.
Well, I'm hearing a lot of my Republican senators, almost all of them privately acknowledging that there's a problem here, it's got to be fixed. What's different this time is the number of people who are actually going public. And I am grateful for that. It's been a long time coming, where Republicans have been willing to actually not just say to me privately, but to go public. But we'll have to see, as we work through this afternoon and probably into tomorrow and the next couple of days, whether those public concerns will allow us to put meaningful reforms in place. And again, a factual evidence point of this is Hanover County. Hanover County is somebody who's run multiple times in Virginia. I think I've only won it once back in 2008. It's a very conservative community. And if the community had turned out in large numbers last night and the local board of supervisors said, heck, we don't even want an ICE facility, that ought to be an indication that we've got to put some guardrails in place. And I hope that message is received by as many Republican senators as possible.
Our next question is from Kate with NBC 29.
Hi, Senator. Thank you so much for taking questions. To you, I was wondering, as you know, these talks and negotiations are happening in D.C. with the list of demands that the Democrats have laid out for changes within ICE, if those are a package deal or if any one of those could be more negotiated than the next.
Listen, what we tried to put forward was a reasonable set of reforms. In a sense, it was to try to move back ICE procedures and protocols to where they were years ago. I'm sure at the end of the day, it won't go far enough for some folks on my side of the aisle. I'm sure it will be too much for some of them. That's the nature of a compromise. But I'm not going to negotiate what is essential, what could be taken out, or what could be added back in. In this call, I will add one thing that I'm hoping, particularly when we now see this evidence of what's happening in Fulton County, where it appears there's starting to be efforts from this Trump Justice Department to potentially interfere with our elections. I sure as heck don't want to see roving ICE patrols showing up at Virginia polling stations in our primary, or if there is a referendum on redistricting. Our polling stations should be free from outside interference, including interference from ICE. So that's something I want to hope will get into this reform package.
Our next question is from Stephanie with Scripps News.
Hi, Senator. Thanks so much for taking the time to answer questions today. I was wondering if you could expand a bit on your concerns about Tulsi Gabbard being at that Fulton County search yesterday. Obviously, 2020 is a ways back now. What happened in the election results not going to change. It's been in the past. So what are your concerns going forward if, the Director of National Intelligence is putting her thumb on the scale in some way for upcoming elections and the midterms?
Yeah. Listen, that 2020 election has been litigated a variety of times. We all know the president's call to try to ask for, 11,000 some hundred votes. We know there's been actions in Georgia already. It appears the president's obsessed about his loss and can't get out of it. It really begs the question of why the Justice Department, which can't do its job on the Epstein files, get that information out, can take resources away and put them on this kind of case, or why so many FBI agents have been, delegated to doing immigration rather than doing, election security or doing, counter-espionage or, frankly, sex crimes. But the idea that the Director of National Intelligence, who I've had concerns with, obviously, since the president nominated her, who has actively dismantled some of the election security that was put in place by the first Trump administration. The first Trump administration did a very good job on election security in 2020. Tulsi Gabbard has dismantled the Foreign Malign Election Interference Center. So now all of a sudden she's showing up. Her only reason for showing up under the law would be, is there some evidence now of foreign interference in the 2020 election? If that was the case, why was there not any evidence of that brought out in the aftermath when Trump 1 was in, during Biden, now a year plus in? And if there was, she has violated her job by not reporting to the intelligence committees. It appears to me that this is somebody who's desperately trying to get back in the good graces of her boss, Donald Trump. She's been clearly excluded from most of the national security activities in terms of our actions in Venezuela, Iran, questions around Greenland, elsewhere. And so if this is a feeble attempt to show up and just get back in the boss's good graces, that is not the role of the Director of National Intelligence. And if it doesn't worry you, if it doesn't concern you, that she's taking the eye off the ball of how we deal with our foreign adversaries, it should. And I'll be very anxious to hear whatever kind of excuse or if there's even going to be an excuse, or whether they'll just try to bull their way through on this.
Our next question is from Noah Kim with WTKR. Noah, are you there? Okay, our next question is from Janet with WVEC.
Hi, Senator. This is Janet with WVEC.
Hey, Janet.
My question is, are you calling for Kristi Noem to step down?
Yes.
And if you don't get the reforms in this funding bill, will you just flat out not support it?
Listen, I've been very clear that I don't think Kristi Noem is the right DHS secretary. I voted against her, and I think she has been even a worse performer than I expected. And as I said earlier, in any normal administration, after this many screw-ups, she'd be fired. We know this isn't a normal administration. And in terms of the reforms, I've been very clear in my statements. I can't support additional DHS funding if we don't get a reform package in place. And I think that is the absolute will of the vast majority of American people. And I don't know if you've been on the line, but you know, when I mentioned, if Hanover County is turning out in these kind of numbers saying, hey, we don't want ICE in our county, that ought to be a message to all of my Republican friends in Virginia, but also to the national folks and the White House that we need a reform package here. We need to put this agency that's kind of run amok back within some guardrails.
Our final question is from Amy Knowles with Virginia Dogwood.
Hey, Senator Warner, thanks for taking our questions. I got a little Civics 101 for you today.
Okay.
We often encourage people to write to their elected officials whenever they have a concern, a question, or an idea for change. But what actually happens after a constituent contacts their senator? Who reads the message? How is it processed? And how does that influence action?
Well, great question, Amy. We actually get information from constituents, two or three ways. A lot of folks still phone call in. A lot of folks will send us a email or a text. And then a lot of folks use the old-fashioned, postal service. We gather this information, and let me just say on that note, we've had almost a record number of calls this week, being very concerned about the ICE activities in Minneapolis, and their valid concerns that what happens in Minneapolis could happen next in Richmond or Norfolk or Roanoke. So I try to then communicate back either through an email or through a direct letter. I have a number of what's called legislative correspondence, because oftentimes if you're writing a letter, there may be not a single issue, but there'll be 3 or 4 issues raised, so it needs a letter that's tailored. And I look at the kind of core message component. Then my staff has got the ability to kind of get them out on a mass basis. But it's important. It's important to hear from Virginians. I also realize that in a lot of ways you measure by the volume what's really got people's attention. The ICE abuses have now gotten people's attention in a darn dramatic way. And then it's my job to respond. And, it doesn't mean that I'm going to change every position just because a call comes in. But I do have an obligation to explain how I came to a conclusion. And if the facts change, and there have been times where I've changed my position, it's because the facts have changed or I've gotten new information because what I believe is people have hired me for my judgment. And that judgment involves getting input from Virginians, but it also means, doing independent due diligence on whatever issues in front of me. But thanks so much for the question. And I guess if that's the last one, thanks again, everybody. I'm sorry again for the mix-up on the front end, and everybody stay safe.